It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Miriam Bracha Heimler. Eugene Heimler, a Holocaust survivor, was a true hero of the 20th century. On the anniversary of his 100th birthday, the following presentation by Dr. Heimler's widow, Miriam Bracha Heimler, about his life is based on his groundbreaking book, Survival in Society, and his other masterpieces.
Tears flooded down my cheeks, unending tears, and I was unable to stop them. Until he asked me lovingly, "Why are you crying, little one? We have survived. The people of Israel have come back." I could not reply. I could only feel astonishing love oozing from this charismatic man sitting beside me, whose aura enveloped the entire class. It was in the autumn of 1977 in Berlin that I met the professor for the first time. I sat together with about 30 other social workers and listened to this voice, whose language I did not yet understand. As much as I listened to his interpreter, I wanted to hear the man himself. There was something very unusual about him. At that time, I could not define what it was. I only sensed that he was not one of us Germans. Only later did I understand that what this man was transmitting to us was the love and compassion of a survivor of the death camps. I must admit, I was hypnotized by his presence. Not only had almost all his family died in the ovens of Auschwitz, not only had he originated a method of healing with which he helped thousands of others, of people to survive, he did the ultimate. He came to Berlin, to Germany, in order to teach young Germans his approach. A survivor of Auschwitz, from the death camps, came to teach children of his persecutors love. For me, that was quite enough proof. His very presence was enough for me to be convinced that his method would work, because the man spoke truth. Teaching us his survival kit, he also spoke about his feelings of anxiety each time he came to Germany, and about the love of his mother in his early childhood, without which, he said, he would not have survived. He spoke about his safe childhood in a small town in Hungary, and that he was a well-established poet at the age of 17. He told us a dream he had as a young boy of wanting to become a writer and a psychologist. And then, after his childhood paradise, where he chased butterflies in the meadows of his garden and kissed his first girl at the bank of the river Ganges that flew dreamingly through the peaceful little town, his heavenly kingdom abruptly exploded into hell, into ghettos into which the SS forced every Jew. In this ghetto, he was married to his childhood sweetheart Eva. From the heaven of his past, he was taken down to a present of bestiality, brutality, and bloodthirstiness. Together with all the Jews of his hometown, he was taken to Auschwitz, then transported to Tröglitz, to Berger Elster, and to Buchenwald. And yet, there were but few moments for him where he could not see a future. He wrote about these experiences in his remarkable book, Night of the Mist. Dr. Heimler told us about a mental health experiment on which the SS commander embarked in one of these camps to establish the way in which useless and purposeless work would attack the prisoner's will to live, and to measure how many of them in fact would commit suicide. The prisoners were ordered to carry sand and rubble from one end of the compound to the other, about 4 miles, and then back again. Within a few days, results began to accrue. Some prisoners simply gave up the ghost and died, and others ran against the electrified wire that surrounded the camp and committed suicide. And there were those who escaped into internal immigration and became insane. Why did some prisoners survive while others gave up the ghost? On what does it depend whether we are defeated by life or whether we succeed? How does one survive a death camp? He asked us. It appeared, he wrote in his book Survival in Society, that one can turn destructive forces towards some kind of construction and madness towards health if one can redirect one's own internal psychic energy in an outward and positive direction. Important was the relationship between past and present, particularly as these affect the future. It appeared that whatever his past experiences had been, provided a person was capable of finding some satisfying niche in the present, he could function in the here and now and find alternative choices for his future. Looking back, he realized that the satisfying niche in his own case, when all other human satisfactions were absent and the last purposeful activity was also taken away, was a movement inwards, or rather backwards, into the past. And he clung desperately to the love that he had received in his childhood. These happy memories gave him the strength to survive. As a child at home, he had always dreamt of becoming a poet. Before and during the war, he had already written and published poems. He had dreamt of becoming one day a well-known writer. It was in the ghetto, however, that he called himself a chronicler. And now, in Auschwitz, this appointment was confirmed and brought new meaning into his life. He became an eyewitness who registered everything so that he could one day tell the world what he had seen in the name of millions who could no longer speak or write. This task, this new intention, this new purpose of his existence became the bridge between his past dreams and the future. That was enormously important because there had to be a future so that life could have a meaning for him in the present. This new life purpose was not always in the foreground of his consciousness. There were times of pain and horror in which he totally forgot it. But he returned to it time and again. It was also a private victory over the SS guards, who of course never knew that they were under observation. The problem of mental health and survival was also connected with the question of freedom. Freedom of thought, of speech, of movement, of action. It was very important to use as much of this freedom as possible in order to remain mentally healthy. The freedom to verbalize one's thoughts is an indication that one is not totally controlled by the inner and outer forces. It enables one to face the darkness and the enemy. When Eugene Heimler said to his comrades, "These monsters, these bastards, will one day disappear from the face of the earth," then this meant that it was indeed a real possibility. Freedom to act, especially forbidden action, was also very important. He told us that he knew that he had to do something in order to get out of this humiliating and dangerous situation. So he decided to escape from the camp. While he was interned in the camp of Tröglitz, he was drafted to work in a factory. One day, the factory was hit by an American bomb, and Eugene Heimler used this opportunity to escape. He describes these experiences in Night of the Mist. Although he was terribly beaten once he had returned to the camp, his escape had been a triumph, an action that brought with it danger, that defied the SS, a challenge against the SS, a sign that he was not totally in their power. After the experiment of the SS commander about meaningless and purposeless work, Dr. Heimler realized that meaningful work or activity is of the utmost importance to people in order to survive. And after the war, he developed a therapeutic approach that was of particular importance to the unemployed and to people who were struggling to find meaning, purpose, and new possibilities in their lives. The Heimler method of social functioning is about integrating frustrating experiences as useful elements in the present and potentially satisfying elements for the future. An integral part of the Heimler method is the Heimler scale of social functioning, a therapeutic, diagnostic, and prognostic tool which measures satisfactions and frustrations and highlights a person's potential. Insight is not enough, Professor Heimler used to say. Everyone can have insight, but what you are going to do with it, how you transform your insight into action, that is important and vital for your life. Because only new action can change you and your life. Pain and suffering, illness and frustration, and other so-called negative feelings of the human being are motivating forces that we need in order to function successfully in our lives, provided those negative forces are in a certain relationship between 1/3 and 1/5 of the satisfactions that this person experiences. We often want to sweep this so-called negative side under the carpet, deny it, only not to face it. But in order to create electricity, we need a positive and a negative pole. If we take out the negative pole, we have a short circuit and we sit in the dark. The expressions good and bad are our own creation, said Dr. Heimler. The positive and negative pole of the electricity is neither good nor bad. It simply is positive and negative. Without such polarity, energy cannot be produced. That is a God-given law of nature. In our human existence, we constantly, consciously or unconsciously, transform negative feelings, experiences, past episodes into positive ones. We are not driven to our set goals through intellectual curiosity alone, but by a need to overcome our own perceived or unconscious injuries. Dr. Heimler came to realize after the war that the question of sanity or insanity appeared to depend not so much on the fact of injury in the past, but rather on a person's ability or inability to transform and to use such injuries to grow. It became apparent that most of us need some hook in life onto which we can hang our past pains. Having done so, such pains become externalized and give a sense of reassurance and achievement. It was then that Eugene Heimler began to receive some answers as to why some of his comrades in the camp gave up the ghost, committed suicide, or became insane. If one takes away from people the last vestige of usefulness, as the SS had done, the last purpose of being alive, Dr. Heimler contemplated, then nothing is left except to drop out in some way. Another way out, in addition to self-destruction and insanity, is antisocial behavior, which also occurred in the camps. When one takes away from, say, a doctor of medicine, the possibility of working with his patients and makes him feel totally and utterly useless in an environment where doctors are needed more than in any other place of the world, like in Auschwitz. When one takes away from such a man the personal relationships, his wife, his children, his security, and exposes him to completely useless work tasks, could it not be then that in some cases the internal psychological chemistry will choose an antisocial a social way out, while in others it may choose insanity or self-destruction? So a gifted surgeon, for example, can become a sadist and a murderer if society takes away from him the hook onto which he can hang his own experiences. Professor Heimler recognized that we can exist as sane or useful people only as long as we transform and utilize what we would term the negative in us. Then work and interest, financial security, family relationships, friendships, and social contacts all become channels or containers through which we can transform our human weaknesses into strength. After having examined the lives of so many people, and not least his own, Professor Heimler came to the conclusion that the difference between Auschwitz and our modern industrial world is only one of degree. A difference that lies basically in the fact that our modern society allows us to find niches, hooks, and containers to transform our bestiality into manhood. The will to live is dependent on feeling useful. Man must find out and be helped to find out how he can use his negative side more constructively, how he can transform his weakness into strength, into activities that are useful to them and to society. Indeed, what strength this man had, a survivor of the death camps, to use his own humiliating experiences in order to help others who, as he said, carried their own very personal Auschwitz with them. He emphasized again and again that action is the end of persecution. His motto was, man is not only what he was, but what he does. And what he does alters who he is. Soon after Eugene Heimler began to live again, he wrote, "Once one realizes that the form of life we know is imperfect and limited by death, one begins to make meaning out of pain and suffering. This in consequence means that one is not broken by suffering, but it becomes a source of insight. Instead of asking, why should this or that happen to me? One says, it is happening. So, what am I going to do with it? What lessons am I going to learn from it? Through these insights, one not only accepts pain, but uses it for creativeness." Eugene Heimler continued coming to Germany for many years in order to deliver his message to the children of his persecutors. Dr. Heimler's work is beautifully summed up in a famous Jewish story by the Dubner Maggid. A king once owned a large, beautiful, pure diamond, of which he was justly proud, for it had no equal anywhere. One day, the diamond accidentally sustained a deep scratch. The king called in the most skilled diamond cutters and offered them great reward if they could remove the imperfection from his treasure jewel. But no one could repair the blemish. The king was sorely distressed. After some time, a gifted jeweler came to the king and promised to make the rare diamond even more beautiful than it had been before the mishap. The king was impressed by his confidence and entrusted his precious stone to the jeweler's care. And the man kept his word. With superb artistry, he engraved a lovely rosebud around the imperfection and used the scratch to make the stem. Elie Wiesel, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, wrote a profound introduction to Eugene Heimler's famous book, Night of the Mist.
Published in London almost 60 years ago, Eugene Heimler's book, Night of the Mist, is now, thank God, being reprinted. This will ensure its rightful place in the literature of the Holocaust. I read it at the time and have just reread it. It is a human document of great value. It contains wounds, both familiar and less familiar, that will long haunt the reader. I met the author in London, but we could have met earlier in one of the weird crossroads of the kingdom of the night. A psychiatrist, he devoted himself to healing the mutilated souls of life's victims. He, who had known the unfathomable and infinite power of evil, tried to ease the burdens of suffering. I remember his voice and his eyes. Eugene was 21 when he arrived at Birkenau. His description of what he saw, heard, and lived through is sincere and restrained. He tells wonderful and moving stories of his childhood and adolescence in Hungary, his first loves and youthful reveries, the sudden German occupation, the wedding in the ghetto, the beginnings of fear, the intimations of the trials to come, the rebellion against destiny. Eugene and his loved one are married, but their happiness lasts only one night. Their honeymoon is spent in a sealed boxcar heading toward the unknown. This gripping account is profoundly honest. The astounding episodes he relates are both atrocious and bizarre. In Auschwitz, a few paces from the crematoriums, the daughter of the chief of a gypsy camp takes a liking to him. She feeds and protects him. They make love in Auschwitz. Later on, a head of the camp takes notice of him. Thanks to an SS officer, Heimler is put in charge of a group of 10 young prisoners. Surely a guardian angel is watching over him. On the edge of despair, a man consoles Heimler. It is the rabbi who officiated at his marriage so many eternities ago. These miraculous moments, more often than not, engulfed in all-encompassing climate of brutality. Heimler captures it well, the stark dehumanization of some, the desperate solidarity of others, the pangs of hunger, the power of attraction of a piece of bread, the disappearance of all traces of civilization, culture, and morality, the conversations about the past, meditations on God, the dreams that make waking harder, more unbearable. How did Heimler manage to survive death, the ugly death that never ceased to stalk him? The selections, the blows, the nights of despair. It would have been so easy, so tempting to let oneself fall into the gaping abyss. In those sorrowful times for mankind, it was easier to die than to live. How can we explain the tenacity, the will to resist, to last out the death camps? Some survivors talk about the will to survive, which is something different, in order to bear witness in the name of history. Was this enough to slip through the net? How can we grasp the faith that this implies, the faith in man, if not in God? How can we believe in the future or in eternity in a place where the future of men was flouted and annihilated? We have no answers to any of these questions, but to face them better, we must read testimonies by these witnesses, spared by a whim of fate to give memory a chance to vanquish death.
Rabbi Dr. Andre Unger was a close friend of Dr. Heimler. They were both Hungarians. Rabbi Unger wrote a foreword to Night of the Mist.
Eugene Heimler was blessed with the love of 3 extraordinary women. There was his teenage sweetheart Eva, whom he married in the shadow of the Nazi guns, and whom he lost a few days later to the unutterable horrors of the Shoah. There was Lily, his second wife, who nurtured him back to health and hope, who gave him his children as well as his will to live, and who died of cancer after the long and brave struggle. And then there was Miriam Bracha, his student, then colleague, then wife, whose fierce loyalty and love made his last few years serene and happy. We owe a deep debt of gratitude to Miriam Bracha Heimler at long last for making Night of the Mist, already a recognized classic in Britain, Europe, Canada, and America, available in Israel too. Eugene Heimler, like his own late father, was a lifelong Zionist, one who did his utmost to support the birth and then the success of the Jewish state. While his work anchored him to the English-speaking countries on both sides of the ocean, he continued to the end to cherish the hope of eventually settling in Israel. Had he not died tragically in 1990, he would surely have fulfilled his vision of living out his years in a small house on the Galilee with a glimpse of the shore of Lake Kinneret. Providence decreed otherwise, alas, but his literary and spiritual legacy clearly belongs to the Jewish people and their miraculously reborn state more than to any other part of mankind. 80 years have passed since the events described in Night of the Mist, 30 years since Heimler's own death in London on a cold, gray winter's day. But the story he tells is vividly, immortally alive. It is a tale of horror and heartbreak, of loss and degradation, but also of hope and faith and warmth and humor and immortal humanity. It is unlike any other work that came out of the ashes of World War II. His voice is a poet's voice, as well as a philosopher's and a psychologist's. Heimler's voice is a young voice, an ageless voice. Our lives are fuller for listening to it.
In his second powerfully written volume, My Life After Auschwitz, Dr. Heimler describes his incredible life's journey from persecuted Jewish child in a small town in Hungary to world-renowned writer, therapist, and teacher. In Messages, a survivor's letter to a young German, Eugene Heimler describes his journey of losing, searching, and refinding his own identity and place in his physical, emotional, and spiritual worlds. In The Healing Echo, Dr. Heimler teaches you his unique, empowering self-help method, how to transform your frustration and destructive impulses into creativity and new opportunities for flourishing. In Constructive Use of Destructive Forces, Dr. Heimler describes in detail his interviewing and therapy technique with individuals, couples, and groups. Dr. Heimler's The Storm, Tragedy of Sinai is a powerful drama in verse that reveals the secret of the survival of the Jewish people and how the Jews have been able to overcome history's never-ending challenges.
So I want to thank you so much, Miriam Bracha Heimler. It's been a great honor and a privilege. And Dr. Heimler's remarkable books are available on Amazon, www.amazon.com. And for more information about each of the books can be found on New Holocaust Literature. So one goes to www.newholocaustliterature.com. Thank you so very much.
Before we end, I would like to say a special thank you to the artist who produced this wonderful photograph of Dr. Eugene Heimler, Gary Italiander. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
So here are the Heimler family photographs. These are Eugene's parents. His mother actually passed away before the war started. His father, his sister with her little baby, and his grandfather and grandmother with his aunts and uncles, they all perished in the Holocaust. And the photos were saved by a Hungarian maid that worked in the Heimler family's house. And so when Eugene went back to Hungary, to his hometown Szombathely, he actually got back the photos together with the silver candlesticks that the maid also saved.